So one of the hot topics around churches is whether they should still assemble or not. There's a couple different ways to look at this, and if your conviction is different than mine, that's okay. I just want to make sure these are presented. I think some of the main reasons that we should respect the government and not assemble in this time is because of the submission, because of the testimony, because of the stumbling blocks, and because of wisdom. See, Romans 13 talks about how we are supposed to submit to the government. You don't see one time where Paul, outside of specific persecution, Paul and the apostles really going against the government. And even Jesus, he typically just submitted to them. It was more of the religious leaders that were saying you have to do things a certain way that he was really opposing. We submit to our government because Scripture says that God put them in place, even the ones that are not so great. In fact, the Israelites were under the Egyptians for so long. The Egyptians were so bad and didn't let them go out and worship in the wilderness. The Israelites didn't go out against Pharaoh's will. They waited until Moses and God brought about the salvation, and then they did it, not circumventing the authority that was placed there, even if it was a bad one. Second is your testimony. The view that a Christian would have if they're just out gallivanting and meeting all together and basically flagrantly pushing against these suggestions and rules is a bad one. It hurts your testimony. So Christians don't care about this. Oh, Christians don't care about the government. Oh, Christians don't care about these things that are in place essentially to help other people. And heaven forbid anyone would actually contract this thing and spread it around. That would be the worst testimony. The next one would be the stumbling block. Let's say you have faith to do this and you've been called by God to do it. Great, okay? But your calling might be different from someone else's calling. And so you create a stumbling block for someone else. Oh, I'm sorry, my faith is that I should do this. And if you don't, you better examine yourself. Because okay, listen, that's fine. Don't be a stumbling block for someone else, making them feel like they're less of a Christian. They have less faith. If they've prayed to God and they've understood that submission, testimony, stumbling block, and wisdom, and they're at peace with meeting online, which is an amazing new resource. The disciples probably wished they had something like this to reach people that you could never reach otherwise. Then, anyway. The next one would be wisdom. There's tons of godly wisdom about preparing. You know, it says the prudent see danger and they take refuge. He is our refuge, right? We come into him for the refuge. But we also recognize that God put governments in place to help us. And there's tons of wisdom about obeying the government. There's tons of wisdom about understanding the multitude of counselors and those who God has put in place, doctors and scientists and political people, etc., to listen to them. We know that God is a monopolizer of all wisdom. He created all wisdom. If anything is wise, it's his. So if a scientist is saying something and it's true, well, it's from God. So you don't have to worry about do I have faith or do I have wisdom? Sometimes faith is trusting the wisdom of someone that God put in place as well, who they're talking. So I think those are the four main reasons I believe Christians are okay not to meet together and use these other forms of connecting and online and worship and especially at home. Work on your own prayer life. What a great time. No more relying on someone else to feed you. You got to feed yourself now. Sometimes these are great times, honestly. So I would recommend just understanding submission. We as Christians are called to submit to the governmental authorities, whether they're good or bad. This is not a specific persecution of the church, so we need to remember that. We need to remember that it might damage our testimony to those outside of the church. It might look really bad. It could be a stumbling block for those in the church who are in a different position, a different scenario, or who are actually affected by this thing way more than us way out away from places like New York. And the wisdom. There's so many scriptures about the wisdom that comes into play with obeying these kinds of orders that could be God helping us stop it through the minds of the people that he put in those places to talk about science and the doctors and all that. So anyway, that's my take. If you believe it, great. If not, great. Just please pray to God and just make sure that whatever you're doing is in love and is pushing others towards Christ, whether it's online or in person.